people on the permanent building committee?
We're live.
Huh?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Sunderland Board of Selectmen, if we can call to order at 7:03. Tonight we're going to continue on, the short answer is yes. We're going to continue on with our budget deliberations. Last week, there was some discussion about how in our conversations at the municipal budget level, with the school committee and the school budgets having such an impact, it would be awfully nice to have some folks from both committees available to talk about not just their budget process, but all the global process. And we're going to go through our minutes. We are going to end tonight. We're going to go through the warrant articles, hopefully some recommendations, the beginning of the motions review. We also have, to close out our meeting tonight, in executive session, and that is under section, I'm going to get my agenda, hang on. It's going to be under Mass General Law 38, 21, 3, and 7, and frankly, it has to do with the fact that we're in contract negotiations with the police department, and it's an update. The board has an appointee, myself, and it's a matter of updating the board, and at the same time to review and deal with minutes of the prior year. So that's the only reason. We'll be adjourning to open session, only to adjourn our regular meeting. Okay, so first up tonight, we've gotten through our Budget 101 last week to the tune of about, I don't know, $170,000 worth of gap. Over the course of this current week, Margaret, the department heads, boards and committees have been working on that spending reduction plan. Now remember, we have requests in front of us that exceed all of our available revenues. It's just that simple. Expense growth exceeds our capacity to raise money. So we're going to continue on with that discussion tonight. Margaret, if we could go to the summary sheet, if you would. That is the summarized tax recap cherry sheet, the work from this week.
Yep.
To set the framework. Okay. Focus. Big. Have to excuse me. So as we started and got through last week, we had finished last week with $107,000 worth of gap that is between the revenues. The current week, of course, you know that over the course of the last month, the solar PV project has fallen away for this fiscal year, and that expense has come out of our budget. That left us to the tune of, I don't know, $51,000 worth of expense reduction. No change in the revenue stream, as we have some kind of consensus between the House, the Senate, and the governor. And at the same time, from a formula perspective, we take average of the last 3 years and use that as a formula. So we're less reactive in trying to work off of at least a short trend with respect to state revenues. And with that, I'll hold back. You want to go down the list, if you would, Margaret? Sure.
Okay, so the appropriated tax levy consists of the FY14 tax rate, yep, plus, actually, if I just show the comment here. Yeah. Okay, so it's the FY14 levy limit that's reported on the town's recap sheet to the Department of Revenue. That was $4,359,605. Plus 2.5% growth, which is allowed under Proposition 2.5, which is $108,990. Plus estimated new growth, which actually is down from initial projections. That's down to $20,163. Plus all excluded debt on the FY15 budget, which equals $285,389, for a total appropriated tax levy of $4,774,147. Next are the cherry sheet revenues. I think we learned the hard way in the past, in FY09, when the governor had mid-year 9C cuts, that we needed to be conservative in our state aid revenue projections. And so what we do now is, in each of these categories, we use the prior 3-year actual state aid, except for the areas that are considered offsets. So in general government, we use the prior 3-year average of veterans benefits, of pilot payments, of unrestricted general government aid, and then we add in the libraries, it's the regional library offset. That is 100% in that number, and that's reflected in the out-of-budget expenditures at the bottom of the revenue sheet. We can talk about those later. On the education side, we show the prior 3-year actual Chapter 70 and any other non-offset receipts that show on the education cherry sheets. The offsets of school lunch and school choice receiving are shown at 100% of their projected value for FY15 in that line. So that's how we get those numbers.
Do you have the actual cherry sheet numbers?
The H1s?
Yeah.
I do. Actually, yes, I have a cherry sheet. I have it, hold on here.
So what
Here it is, cherry sheet data. Right now, FY15, you'll see the governor's budget right down here is $1,111,035. That's what the governor's projecting. And then the general government is $600,781. There's also been a resolution voted in the Senate to increase unrestricted general government aid by $12,000 something dollars. But by doing that, they're not necessarily protecting other general government receipts like payment in lieu of taxes and things like that. So we have to be careful about those too.
Didn't Steve and Stan say that their budgets are all set now? They've already come out of conference?
We have not received that from DOR yet.
No,
They were
Stan told us the other day?
going into conference.
Yeah, that they were all set.
Yeah, we haven't gotten the House budget yet. We have not gotten the House budget. We haven't gotten the DOR numbers yet for the House.
We haven't?
We got the governor's.
Right.
But you haven't got anything from the Senate or the House?
Not that I've seen.
Okay, we're gonna write in your little email, right?
Okay. All right, so.
Doug, you go ahead.
Okay, so that's what the governor said, and then whatever, and this, I forget what this, the are they, the State House?
Yep.
Likely, I mean, so far going in with numbers lower or higher or not, non-committal?
Right in the range.
Yeah.
There's not a
The
lot of,
area-
there's
Won't
not a
be
big
lower,
delta. Go ahead, Margaret.
The area in which they're committing is in unrestricted general government aid. So this is the resolution they voted, so, you know, at this point, I wouldn't expect any reductions in any areas, but it's,
Nor significant increase. I mean, the trend line has been pretty stable over the last, since really 2010.
yeah,
Incremental, and then, more importantly, targeted.
yeah.
It's really specific areas of they're allocating money and resources to.
Right. You can actually see where we had this, I'm sorry, this is really, how can I,
Clear the
just
shading off, even.
clear the shade? Oh, here we go. Look at that, on the far right column, the net state aid change, the final. In '09 to '10, our state aid went down almost $123,000.
Yeah.
In FY11, it went down almost $223,000.
Right.
In FY12, it went down $40,900, and it's been rebuilding slightly since.
And
Right.
that's a very important thing to take into account, because while we're dealing with our budget stuff, and I can't stress this side of the equation enough, because while we're struggling with our part, the state input is going down. And now it's kind of leveled off a little bit, but, so we're left paying more than we were before.
And the projected, you're saying that you're using for the 15 is the 3-year average of, so 12, 13, 14, the average of 12,
Yes.
13, 14?
Mhm. Yeah. I think that's what I used. I can verify that, but I think that's what it is.
Okay.
Plus, we add the 100% of the offsets, which is a big number of, for school choice receiving, that's a big number. But it's directly offset in those out-of-budget expenditures at the bottom of that sheet, so.
Right.
Okay, so, do you want to go back to revenues?
Please.
Okay. All right, so,
And the reason for doing this again is how do we get to how do we get to this gap? This is the left-hand side of the ledger, the expenses are the right-hand side of the ledger.
Okay, so local receipts are just that. It's all the receipts that are collected and kept locally. The biggest piece of that by far is motor vehicle excise. There's also local permits and licenses. The meals tax revenue is included in that, so there are a number of different components to that 497,500 figure. That also, because those are estimated local receipts for the coming year, that's also a conservatively projected number. Let's just say the Department of Revenue does not look kindly on municipalities that overestimate their revenues and then fall short on the revenue side. So, we
Wouldn't be
take a
good for us
conservative.
anyway.
Excuse me?
Wouldn't be good for us to overestimate that
Would not
either,
be,
so.
yeah, it would not be good. Okay, so then we get into other available revenues. We have a Comcast PEG Access Fund. You might remember this being mentioned for the school wireless network that was put in. That was funded through the PEG Access Fund. And this $14,194 pays for the telecommunications salary and expense line in the budget, and also some indirect costs such as the buildings, its portion of the building's electric usage and things like that. The next number we'd be looking at would be sewer reserve. The $344,611 is the total of the entire wastewater treatment plant operating budget and the sewer debt that's also shown in our operating budget, and sewer users pay for that 100%. There's also a small number built into that, I believe, for administrative costs, and the board will be talking about that later.
Margaret, did you include the potential of shipping it not to Montague, the waste?
I did. I actually, yes, and we were still able to reduce the budget, the wastewater operating budget this
Alright,
year.
So maybe we can talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Now or at the budget, during the budget?
Whenever you'd like.
Okay.
Just don't forget it, okay?
I won't.
I'll bring it.
Remind me, yeah, bring it up.
Did you forget sludge?
Note to self.
Oh, we could do it. I mean, we could say right now, the number last year for the wastewater, here we go. Let's take a peek quickly.
Like
Just a
17
very
versus 12.
quick, very quick detour here. Here it is. There's the wastewater treatment plant budget. All right, so last year, this number right here, the $81,510, really big number. It grew a lot from the prior year because last year there was a big change in the contract which required, the town's regional contract, required the sludge, instead of being hauled to Fitchburg, it was going to be hauled all the way to Upper Blackstone, which is in the more the southeastern part of the state. So there was going to be an expected large increase in transportation costs for sludge. Over the past year, the town has been able to dispose a lot of its sludge at the Montague facility, but the town is unable to enter into a contract with Montague to kind of lock us into disposing sludge at the Montague facility. They can't do that. They are actually taking in a lot more volume from other surrounding towns than they ever would have expected to, so they're not going to enter into contracts with any surrounding towns. Sunderland should take advantage of it for as long as it can because it greatly reduces costs, but we did have to at least calculate in the cost for hauling to that Upper Blackstone facility if necessary.
But they're still letting us go to Montague?
There's still going to be, we hope that we'll still be able to ship to Montague, yeah. The result, this $24,741 decrease, means a savings on next year's sewer bills of about $1.50, a little over $1.50 per sewer user bill next year. Okay, back to, is that okay? Did I address what you were looking for there? Okay. All right, next one is Title V. The town has a Title V that's a septic Several years ago, I think it was 1995, Title V came into being. It was basically requirements on private septic systems. The town at that point established a fund that would provide low-interest loans to homeowners to have their septic systems brought into Title V compliance. The program is long over, but the town still has debt for the fund, and the Water Pollution Abatement Trust allows the debt payment to be paid from the fund. So that's where that 5155 comes from. The next line is a one-time revenue. Last year, the town projected more in excluded debt than it actually spent on excluded debt, and the DOR requires that any excess go toward the excluded debt in the coming year. So that's $1,293. The next line is use of ambulance reserve. In the past years, the town has used ambulance reserve to offset its ambulance costs. In FY15, provided a vote is taken under an article to restructure the funding for FY14, it looks as though the full increase in the regional EMS assessment will be able to be paid from the ambulance reserve fund. And in addition to that, it looks like it will leave about $35,000 to be put toward FY16 as well, so it will help a little bit with FY16 growth. And then finally, on the revenue side, you've got free cash. Our free cash this year was certified at, I'll tell you, $397,519. And the town's free cash guidelines provide that 30% of the town's certified free cash can be used toward the budget, and $119,256 is 30% of the town's free cash this year. And then finally, out-of-budget expenditures. State assessments like regional transit, air pollution, all the things that are listed as assessments on the cherry sheets are shown here, and this represents 100% of the projected assessments for the coming year. $260,280, so that comes right off of the revenues. The cherry sheet offsets, like we discussed at the top, the revenues reflect 100% of those offsets, and then this area takes those offsets right off. The other amounts to be raised, $3,100, is for expenses related to tax title. So that would be registry filing fees and things of that nature. And then finally, the allowance for abatements, $25,000 is set aside for abatement requests that could come forth in the coming year. And that's it. That gives the town a revenues total of $6.9 million as of now.
And so with that summary, we look at another round of, we're not gonna be able to, without operating budget override, operating expense override, we'll not have to, we don't have any available revenues at this point or resources to dig down into. And the question, the practical question becomes about that $107,000 odd gap. Now, we've done the first pass series of targeted reductions in the expense request of the current year. It's important to bear in mind that, you know, most of these lines that are in question are reductions in expense growth, not necessarily reductions from the current year. So one of the reasons for having the school committees plural here is, frankly, you're at 70 odd cents on our tax dollar, the total expense of running the schools. In that category that is other available funds, it's really important to bear in mind that many of those funds are targeted specific to their expenses. You could say that about ambulance reserve, which is a result of a revolving fund. You could say that about the sewage treatment plant, which is a user fee. You could say that about SBA reserve, which is essentially done this year. We won't be having that at all next year. That is the school building assistance reserve monies. You could say that about Comcast, that's targeted. So we really show all of that. It's illustrated to make sure everyone knows all of the revenue streams available to the town. We really deal with the top from line 11 up in our areas of potential impact. And then, of course, the expense side. So last week, we were here, Tom made a comment, rightly so, about, it's hard for us to go about any kind of reduction requests without appropriate boards or committees in the room. We kind of operate in a vacuum, and that's one of the reasons for inviting you in tonight. So that's our current budget situation. We deal with an assessment, although, go ahead, Doug.
Well, finish what you're saying, I have a question.
No, I was gonna say that we deal with an assessment from the two school districts, that is Frontier and Franklin Tech, and those assessments aren't always directly proportionate by percentage to expense growth. You can have a zero growth year and still have our assessment go up. That's just reality. And so we see combined this year, quick math, I think our total school is up $143,000+. That's with some reductions throughout all of the different categories. 61,000 at the elementary school, 152,000 at Frontier. So hence the conversation. So I'm gonna go turn this other light back on now that I'm not quite looking at the board.
While Scott is
Trying to figure out what a switch does?
trying to figure out what one of two switches turn the lights on,
It's got a 50-50 shot.
Yeah, exactly. You'll get there eventually, right?
it was very interesting that Scott had talked about, we had talked about charter schools choice last week. And Scott had said something kind of out of, we weren't really talking about it, but he talked about the cost to attend a vocational technical school.
We got one today.
And we just got notified today that if we sent someone from our district went to Smith Vocational, any idea how much it would cost? How much does Frontier cost?
For a school of
See
choice?
this one?
No, just for,
Per pupil.
student.
Per student?
yeah. It's usually around $11,000, $12,000.
I was gonna say $12,000.
You know about that thing. You know how much, if we sent a student to Smith Vocational, how much it would cost? Tuition? Mr. Doobie? How much do you think it'd learn how to be a farmer? How much?
Can we get a drum roll?
It's over $18,000. Plus transportation.
18,270.
Plus your half.
For Smith.
Per school, per student, if we were to send a kid there. Huh?
Interesting, huh?
Franklin Tech doesn't offer an agricultural program.
But what is it?
Huh?
I'm just curious.
I'm not sure.
Scott's figuring right now.
I'm not sure, but I can get back to you before the meeting's over.
So it's funny, and it's not funny, it is, but we're talking how much it costs to send a kid to charter school. And there's some charter schools that cost $18,000. But here, a local vocational tech school tuition, $18,000, and we had nothing to say about that. If we had a kid go, we would just have to send that kid there.
If they got in. And how is that
They
set,
got in, good
Tom?
point.
How is
Very
that
good.
set? I know, like, in terms of charter schools, they just,
They,
numbers.
Scott, the board of directors, they set the price, right?
It's the board of directors, yeah.
They set their price to tuition in to Smith School. And I'm not saying good or bad,
right.
but when you talk about education, our local high school, 11, 12, tops $13,000 per student. I just think it's amazing, some of the conversations we have. On
So-
that point, Mr. Doug.
So, a question, and then some comment before we get into further. Question is, I've noticed for as long as I've been observing, you guys are laudably conservative about, projecting numbers from expectations of dollars from the state, and I think the history shows that that's a good idea. Given that, and given how doing that and doing like that rolling 3-year average does wind up putting you in close proximity, better proximity on the projections, and does it really make sense to keep that percentage on free cash at 30%? you know, so it's what?
So
One,
good-
no,
It's
it's
a
not
good
necessarily, I mean, a long-term fix to the
Right.
solutions, but I mean, you know, we are still obviously feeling the effects of what started in 2008, 2009. And, you know, there is some signs of recovery at the state level in the past couple of years relative to numbers going down. They're actually at least modestly going up. And, you know, because the other option is to, you know, keep inflicting pain on ourselves, ask for an override again, you know, all tough things, so.
Sure.
Along those lines, you may have seen some of that recovery, Doug, at the state level, but we haven't seen it if you simply look at our unrestricted general government aid and/or Chapter 70 aid. You haven't seen it at the municipal level yet. Again, that targeted spending has been just that, targeted spending. And it's really important to bear in mind. On the same subject, with respect to use of free cash, the guideline was developed several years ago to remove some of the reactive histrionics that we go through, to create some gaps in future years. So by leaving a little bit of free cash in free cash to start the process again in the upcoming year, we have been in 3 years within high 3 digits of our estimates of free cash.
Right.
So by using it in the current year, you deplete it the next year.
Right, I understand.
So the mechanics, I think, are important. If the angle is to simply pour more free cash into the budget, the question becomes what happens next year.
Okay.
We just
Right.
put
So
off.
anyway, I wanted to just.
Because you can use it, that excess once. And then you just get whatever comes in that
Right, after
next
that.
year, after that.
I guess, Doug, an answer could be also, is that the finance committees in years past and the Board of Selectmen have always had, we've had
Capital stabilization.
big discussions about what is the right number to spend out of free cash. And should we apply, and I hope I don't wanna paraphrase for you guys, but also, is it right to use free cash in our operating budget? Because free cash is not a reoccurring revenue. So the guidelines are pretty much written so that we wouldn't find ourselves overextended. So let's say we had 397 and you could apply $250,000 to this year's budget, but that may not be a reoccurring number, and that the following year you could be in a much deeper set of problems. So when the Finance Committee board sat down and talked about that, it was really hard to come up with, in our conversations, we both wanted to be able to sink our teeth into something as a pretty good guideline. And I think what we ended up with is a pretty good guideline to go at, because if per chance we don't generate any free cash another year, you still have a third that you haven't designated, and worst come to worst, you could carry yourself through one more year to get through that and make plans to go through it.
You got 70%, right? I mean, 'cause you
No.
haven't said
20%.
No,
20%.
30% to the budget, 30% to capital stabilization,
Okay.
20% to stabilization, and 20% stays.
Okay.
so you have that little
Yeah, you need
carryover to
the
go
other
through.
numbers.
It's stabilization gets applied to, but doesn't
Capital
stabilize,
plan.
not, so there's capital stabilization and then there's a regular stabilization, or is it?
Yes,
That's
And the
Yes.
regular stabilization goes towards,
extraordinary expenditures. Well, I think recently, since the establishment of the Capital Stabilization Fund, I think stabilization is treated as a fund that would, that would take care of any unforeseen, large unforeseen costs. We're talking cash reserves. Stabilization is one of those funds. Free cash, whatever's left in free cash after appropriations would also be considered cash reserves. The Department of Revenue recommends about 5% cash reserves to the operating budget total. So,
so if stabilization, so stabilization would be the same as what goes into the operating budget, so it's like 111.
Well-
And then if that doesn't get spent, it just stays in that,
Mhm.
but that,
the simple thing is the free cash is like a checkbook and stabilization is like a bank account.
Right.
And the thing that's important with stabilization
That's good.
is that when July 1st comes, we have no free cash available for us to use. So if we lose a police cruiser and/or fire truck and/or boiler at the school, how would we pay for it?
In years past, we've used stabilization to offset 9C cuts as well.
Right.
Yes.
So that,
Mid-year
those monies are
reductions.
available
Done,
to
yeah, in
us.
the past.
Those monies are available to us to handle, it's no different than Frontier has an E&D. Difference is E&D at Frontier, Frontier's excess and deficiency account is like our stabilization. You still have to have appropriation to use that money, but you have it in case something happens.
Right.
They just Frontier just calls it a different name.
We have the free cash number. What's the stabilization?
Starting balance? Yeah.
How much are we using this year?
There's nothing proposed yet.
Haven't finished that yet.
The starting balance is $265,347, which represents 4.3% of our operating budget before. That doesn't count the wastewater treatment plant budget or debt service.
And does that include the 111 or whatever of free cash?
No, not yet.
No, it's separate. Free cash, well, the starting balance of free cash is $397,519. That goes away at the end of June. If free cash goes away, you're not able to. Certified free cash is good through our town meeting cycle, then it goes away till next year's.
And then when is
Do-
it available again?
Do you
It was
understand,
Once
do you
it's
understand
certified
what it
next-
means by
once it's
going
certified
away?
next year.
Well, I'm assuming it goes,
Okay,
moves into
it's,
certain other categories.
so
No, it goes away.
what happens is the state until when July 1st, after the fiscal year, the town has to go back and balance its books. We call it the recap sheet.
Yep.
All right, so you have to go through all the line items, all the departments, you do all your billing, then you put everything together, you fill out this page, we work between the assessors, the treasurer and the collector, they do all their reconciliations, they put everything together, and they say, okay, they send it back to the state looks at it and says, yep, you followed all the right procedures, we certify that your books are correct and you have
Blank.
blank. So it doesn't really go away. We say it goes away because
Because you
we
can't
don't
use
have,
it. We
we don't
can't
have
use
the
it.
use of that
Right.
money
You
for,
can't use it.
at the earliest typically is September, October.
Yep.
The earliest you can use it again.
Right.
Whenever it's
But
certified.
cap stabilization,
You have it, you've
Yeah.
appropriated to it.
because you're not,
So-
and what would happen is, a lot of time what you would do is if you had a severely bad winter and you expended $100,000 on excess, your
Snow and
excess on for snow and ice, what they could do is the state could just take that $100,000 you thought had free cash and they would just
Right.
wipe that right off,
And
Yeah.
for a
which
number,
we used to do.
for a number of years, it was done that way before we paid for the bills in real time. And
Just- Sorry,
Right.
just to build on what Tom said, even though like the earliest we could do it is September, October, past few years, we haven't gotten free cash certified until March, April.
Yeah,
It just got
Like we
Very,
just got
very-
certified.
yeah, just got
From the
certified.
last
right.
Yeah, so we,
Why?
yeah.
Right.
yeah,
just now got
So
certified.
it's really not something to count on.
So, but you
The-
can
the-
move it to, some of it into stabilization?
that's part of our
Before
guidelines.
You
one of the
can through
plans
town
that we
meeting
use.
vote.
Town meeting vote.
Yeah, before July 1st.
Right.
And it takes a 2/3 vote to vote it into stabilization or out of stabilization. So,
Which is good, because it's not supposed to be your operating, it's not supposed to, and we always think it's good because it's not supposed to be your operating, but it's supposed to be,
For extraordinary?
Yes.
Or out of
yeah,
expected?
or a
Yeah,
large
so
purchase.
if something happened in October and our free cash wasn't certified yet, and we lost the ambulance or a fire truck, we'd have to have a special time meeting and have to vote on it. We can't just go, oh, we need to borrow this money here.
Or like another October
Or a
blizzard.
or a subsequent request from the schools. It's not uncommon.
Right.
Right.
it's probably important to know what
I
goes
rem-
into
I was
free
rem-
cash. too.
was remiss in actually calling on Tracy, then we'll get to free cash.
Okay, thank you.
I have two questions.
Sure.
The 1.1 budget for the school, does that include the retirements? Because the retirements
Nope.
have been like in and out
Nope,
and in and out.
that's actually, what you see up there,
Retirements are not in that number?
under education,
That's the state aid
That's the
toward
aid just to
education. That's
education.
only the revenue going from the state, going to the town for education.
So this is all the revenue side. That's
Okay,
set to the town just for ed.
Yeah.
And then my
Act-
second question
Yep.
is,
Well, it is a good question, like, in terms of what the
whenever
107
we get to,
shorted,
right,
Yep.
does it include, well, it includes that somewhere
No.
presumably.
Not yet,
Okay,
No.
Haven't even got there yet.
not yet.
okay.
okay.
So
The-
the second question.
Yep.
These are things that we can control. You know, our healthcare package and our insurance package for the town, do we shop that out every year? I mean, I'm sure this happens,
Sure.
but I have to ask this question.
Hey, raise a great point.
Question?
Because those are huge.
Sure are.
Very huge.
Actually, where we're part of the Hampshire Collaborative, and the big thing in the state is what they call the state GIC program, and that's what the state ran for their employees. And basically, you only could be a state employee to get GIC health plan. What, 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Governor Patrick and the state legislators decided that they were going to open up GIC to the communities.
They were gonna require it for a while.
We're gonna require it.
Right.
At the
Unless you can beat
time,
it.
that happened, Frontier and many of the local, Frontier was part of the Franklin Collaborative.
So it's a tech.
Educational, right.
And it didn't really have a good, they did not, unfortunately, they weren't doing very well at that particular time, because it's all based on past
History, yeah.
past history. But we, the town, belong with the Hampshire Collaborative. We have better pricing, better services at the present time than the GIC. So part of our thing, one of the jobs of the treasurer is to look at the comparison to be GIC and,
You feel
Very,
good about it, okay.
very good.
And
It's a very
insurance?
large group comprised of many, many municipalities in Western
and,
Mass.
and in fact, that's who the Frontier, that's who they
Safe-
use now.
Safe
They
Road.
use
They
the
do,
Hampshire
the school- yeah.
Collaborative. Because it was actually, they found, and they researched independently,
They found big savings.
and they found that was better for them to go with the Hampshire Collaborative versus the GIC as well. So, and it's funny, because when we go to state meetings, they always tout the GIC as a money saver, but for us, we have not been able to prove that.
Yeah.
Not at all, not even close.
So just as a point, town insurance this year's, for all the staff is only up $4,500 total increase. And again, that's an estimate. When I say estimate, it's based on the prior year's, face value of the policy, and then guidance from the collaborative as to what they expect for some measure of escalation. It's actually been flat a couple of years. We had double-digit growth 2008, 2009. It was crazy. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's a great line of questioning, those kinds of
No, it's a
things
good
looked
question.
at.
Well,
Well,
those are things that you just can change. There's
Right.
so many things we can't change, you
Right.
know, so.
Actually, the healthcare costs over the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, have stabilized.
2 years, we've had 0% increases.
For us at
That
least,
is incredible.
for us at least, they've stabilized, and I mean, back 7, 8 years, we were having huge problems with that.
So that's super tight. Is there anything else like that that we can ask about? Like, you know,
It's pretty much, but we've had good luck with the Hampshire Collaborative. But we could offer GIC if we thought it was a better deal, but it hasn't proved out to be better for us yet.
To your point, Tracy, other things we could ask about, maybe it's time to move to the expense side.
Okay.
Expense side,
The fun part.
Right? Well, it's not really necessarily the fun part.
So where do you want to begin?
Start right at the very beginning,
Right at the top.
right at the top.
Okay. Okay, let me get out mine.
So if you look, you're gonna see the yellow is gonna be the totals of, they're gonna be the net of the entire section. Go ahead, Tom. You wanna
so what are you
finish?
gonna look at now?
Actually,
Are you gonna look at the numbers we looked at last week, or are you gonna look at the new numbers that Margaret, after her department head?
I have not plugged those in yet, but we could talk about
Yeah.
those
Well,
budget
yeah.
areas if you
I
want
think
to.
we have to plug them in at this point.
Okay.
Right.
That works. Then starting at the top, and they'll be plugged in as we talk.
Yep.
It's a live plug-in.
It's a
So-
lie.
This is a
What-
live
what-
butchering.
What Margaret's been doing, Margaret had a department head meeting last Thursday, and now we're going back to ask the town department to relook at their budgets.
Yep. I followed up with individual meetings with each department after that too, so.
That's what, Margaret loved this time of the year.
Oh, it's not.
They love getting a note, department heads love getting a note from Margaret that
Yeah.
she'd like to talk
Time to
to.
look.
Everyone wants to hide. That-
But it's gotta be somewhat expected.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Everyone is, I'd like to think that everyone, the department heads are very well informed about what's happening every step of the way, because we have the regular department head meetings, and again, we meet individually, so.
Although,
The best meeting is when Margaret has to talk to herself.
although keep in mind
She
that
always
I
these,
don't make a lot of progress in those.
She loses no matter what side she takes.
Okay,
one
let's,
thing we gotta keep in mind though is these reductions that we look for can only come out of 30% of the budget or so.
that's right.
Correct.
We can't look at regional
That's all we have
assessments.
left to remove it, because we can't just go and say, okay, elementary school or Frontier, cut this much.
We're gonna ask for help.
You know, in other words, the reductions that we're gonna look at now can only come out of the remaining 30% or so of the budget.
What does
because
that
the
mean?
schools have
The
already
remaining
passed-
30%?
Well, in other words, you've got 70% or so of the total budget and the expenses, let's say, goes to the schools.
Yeah,
All of the
So-
reductions.
The rest of the reductions can only come out of the remaining
Mm.
30%. So police, fire,
Yeah, we don't have,
everything but.
us here, like,
Right.
you know, in the
Everything
town,
but schools.
so.
Well,
So-
we don't, the school, we could make a recommendation, we could say, well, you take
You could.
$40,000 off from the elementary budget.
Uh-huh.
But for us to say that without knowing, we don't know your budget, we have to ask you, superintendent and school committee,
Right.
for that. You know your budget better than we do.
Okay.
For us to ask for 40,000, and the kicker is from Frontier, for us to ask for $40,000 from Frontier, that really is kind of like a $160,000 cut to the budget. Because we have about,
27.
Deerfield has about 50%.
Right.
Sunderland has about 25, we have 27. So I just use,
Yep.
so we have 25, so that's, and then Whately and Conway have the other 25%. So for us to ask for 40,000 is actually like asking for 160,000 Frontier.
Sure.
And Frontier's never,
so,
Right.
reductions. All right, so the first budget segment within general government is Select Board. And I met with myself and decided
How do you do?
we had to make some cuts, right? So,
she's
all
so
right,
smart.
so, all right, so we're gonna be removing backfill contingency. That would have been to provide some staffing backfill capacity in the event of temporary vacancies in, single office, single staff offices and things like that. So what we'll end up doing, if there's any situation that we don't have funds in an existing line that could be drawn from, we would be going to the reserve fund again in the coming year to request funds. The other line that badly needed an increase, but we are gonna have to make an adjustment, is in the technology line. And my recommendation is a reduction of $1,500 in that requested increase. Okay, so that brings down the select board's total budget increase to 1.5%.
This is where we make the plug for anybody who wants to donate new computer equipment. Any corporate donors out there that would like to donate PCs or iPads or anything to the technology budget, please feel free to come on down.
Well, thank you. Okay,
So,
okay, oh, I'm sorry, do
Sorry,
you
was
want to
the-
discuss that, Scott?
yeah,
Was the
actually,
backfill line added before you removed it?
Excuse me?
Was the backfill line added to the budget before you just removed it?
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah, it had been
Yeah.
there since the beginning of this
Oh,
year's
okay.
budget, yep, of this year's budget process.
the narrative's gonna stay on the backfill?
I can remove that line completely.
No, I'd
For
like
the
to keep,
coming
I'd like to
year.
keep the line there.
The lawnmower,
Right, let's see what we
looks
pull
good.
out.
You know, we got another price on that, right? They didn't just reduce it,
No,
right?
that's this,
We did bid it out.
last year during budget season, we were actually getting ready to execute a new contract, so we were actually out for bids, and the contract came in at a lower amount, so that's where that's
I
from.
think, what, we have 4 or 5 bids last year?
I think so.
I think we had four.
That's great.
Yeah.
actually, usually there's a big spread in the lawn mowing, believe it or not, there's a large spread in the lawn mowing contract usually.
There can be, yes.
But the low number is always, is it gonna be a new vendor this year?
Same vendor.
He just got a better price on gas.
Or
right?
something.
He
was
ga-
able-
gave
or-
us his
or
bids
is
before
doing
the
it
gas
with one
prices
less
started going
employee or something. He was able to,
Well, the Navy just learned how to make fuel out of seawater the other day, so that's good.
we have a lot of seawater. No seawater in Sunderland too.
But to keep it in with a $1 as a placeholder.
With a $1?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, Martin.
Okay, so the government backfill contingency, to keep it, it will be at $1.
Yep.
Okay. The next budget area that could actually,
Now, the accountant's pretty much set up by, contract, right?
that's a contracted service. This actually, their adjustment for FY15 reflects their staffing backfill that they've built up. So in other words, I mean, we contract, our town accountant works 10 hours a week. And if something were to happen, that there was a vacancy in his position, our contract is gonna assure that we have coverage for that, you know, to do our accounting work for us. So,
I don't have, Margaret, I don't have a problem with the accountant. I mean, it wasn't too long ago, we were having an accountant for 27, 30 hours a week plus
It used to be a
benefits, so-
30-hour job.
right, right. And so, and again, they've worked hard to work on their backfill capacities, so that's gonna assure that our accounting functions get done. The next area that I actually recommend reductions is in the town buildings section.
It's way too nice in here.
It's very posh.
Updates are ridiculous.
Town buildings.
Yeah, lap of luxury right here.
In the town building maintenance line, the request that we had put in was for $4,300, $1,800 of which would be to contract for property management services, basically quarterly walk-arounds of the buildings and arranging building maintenance functions and things like that. That would have been about $1,800. And we also had added $2,500 for unexpected building maintenance, because we have all of our building maintenance line currently reflects expected building maintenance. So things like elevator inspections, fire extinguisher inspections, but nothing like
Unexpected.
burst pipes and, you know, things like that, so.
The louvers.
Excuse me?
The louvers
Oh,
of
right,
vacuum
right,
masonry.
right, so, yeah, it could be a whole variety of things. So, I had hoped to try to build that up a little, but my recommendation now is to reduce the requested increase by $3,300, so leaving only $1,000, increase in that line. The next one, the energy contingency line, I do not recommend reducing, because that $2,230 increase pays for the performance contract assurance agreement that we have for those projects, so that can't be taken out. And so that's the adjustment in town buildings that I would recommend. The next section is, I believe, police department. The chief had put in a request for a $2,500 increase in fuel expense to try to increase patrols and to try to cover the increased cost of gasoline. And he has agreed to reduce that, at least initially, by $500. So that reduces it down to a $2,000 increase. The next is fire department. And the chief had requested an increase of $630 in fire department replacement equipment, and he felt that that line could actually be level funded. So that would be level funded at $21,000. That covers the cost of, that includes the cost of hoses and nozzles and other things that used to be captured under the capital plan. It's now in the budget. Okay, so that's fire department change. The next is
Library?
highway department. This is gonna be a little more complicated to do, and I might not be able to fill, well, I think I actually can. At least put in some estimates. The highway department, the hours, well, for most municipal departments were cut back in FY10. The highway department up until FY09 worked 40-hour weeks. And they were cut back to 36 hours a week and incrementally restored till this year to 38 hours a week. And the highway superintendent did ask for restoration to 40 hours a week to allow them to get more projects done, especially in good weather, where they could extend their days. And unfortunately, the budget, you know, and I've talked to the super about this isn't easy, but the budget's not gonna be able to absorb the restoration of hours this year. So that's gonna have to be, basically, it's going to reduce the highway super wages by $2,531 or thereabouts. And then it's gonna reduce the highway laborer wages by $3,465. And so that brings them back down to a 1% increase, which we have to talk about next. All right, so that's the highway department. Next is, can't do anything with that, library. I did talk with the highway director. Oh, and I'm in the wrong budget section. I did talk with the library director. They're trying to maintain the percentage increase they need to remain off of the waivers for the materials expenditure requirement.
Yep.
Okay, so they're trying to maintain that increase of town appropriation that they need in their operating budget to not have to go back on waivers. In other words, being able to get that regional library offset that we talked about before. So I talked with the library director, and the one area that they have seen significant savings and that they may be able to reduce without impacting their budget greatly would be in their building energy line, and that's actually up in the town buildings again. So I'm gonna go right back up to the library building energy, and that's a reduction right now of $560. And given their savings, they should be fine with that. I mean, of course, we have to consider the increased cost of electricity and oil, but that should work okay. So we're gonna go ahead and change the library energy. We're gonna reduce that to, okay. But I reduced it by $630.
That includes, that's heat and
That's heat.
lights?
It's electricity over there.
It's electricity. They operate the full building on electricity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that reduces, that takes away the increase that they requested and then reduces the line slightly from the prior year. And let's go back down to,
Pumps.
Pumps and supplementary.
okay, schools. Now, the superintendent probably may have filled you in about a meeting that I had with her, just like with the other departments, and we talked about possible budget reductions. She did make it clear that any reduction in the elementary school budget would require a vote of the elementary school committee. And has the school committee had a chance to talk about this yet, or?
We meet next Tuesday. Next Tuesday will be our next meeting.
Okay, all right. You know, she gave an initial number, and I'd rather she put it before the school committee than bring any numbers here initially.
That's the right way to do it.
You know, that's the course it should take. So.
Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, and this one I can't make the changes, the personnel committee had recommended a 1% salary adjustment for non-union employees. That would have totaled $5,218. And I have to recommend that that be pulled as well. So there'd be a 0% increase for non-union municipal employees. And I'll make those changes later because that's throughout the that's
Right.
throughout the budget sections.
That's all over. And where does that leave us now? We get down to what size gap, Margaret?
As it stands right now,
We get down to,
the bottom line, okay, so it's 91,198 with the reductions I just made. Equals that plus,
Change my.
oh, wait a minute, what am I doing? Okay, hold on for a second.
Although we look at these as a decrease in the budget, but keep in mind that these aren't without their costs. That's less police patrols, no raises for non-union employees.
Yeah.
So there's a cost to all of
It's
this.
also decreased building maintenance, that's another ongoing.
There's no free lunch. That's pretty much it.
When the personnel increases are taken out, that leaves a gap of $85,980.
Well, not all of it is like a pay cut for somebody. I mean, changing the line item for the library heat
oh no, I agree.
is, you know.
That's not, no, but
Right.
Absolutely right. So this is the
there's a
part,
mix of things.
this is the part where we ask for help and encourage involvement.
Right.
So go to your next meeting and come up with about 40 grand.
So,
Get after it.
No, I'm just asking that in all sincerity.
Right. That's why I'm here.
Okay,
That's why we're sitting here.
I appreciate that.
can I make a comment in
Sure.
context of, you know, our having that discussion and considering other options to deal with the shortfall? You know, I heard from time to time, you know, the perception that, you know, the school just continues to spend more and more money and enrollments are down, and I'm not kicking anybody out of it, but I do hear it. And I, you know, speaking, I don't know the Frontier stuff as well as I know the elementary. But, you know, obviously our budget is still well below what it was when we took the big cuts.
Actually, it's within
still-
$1,000.
Huh?
Actually, it's within $1,000.
That was 2297 in FY nine.
We have the
Yeah.
we have like 8-year record, 9-year records up here.
So 2297 in FY '09, right? And our proposed this year,
2297.
2297?
2,297,000. Call it 22,3.
Sure. 2-1.
About 215.
You got 2,169. 938. Oh, you're adding school transportation too?
You're just going total elementary.
Yeah, total elementary.
This is the total.
Total elementary, okay? So, 150,000 out of starting at 2, we're still down over 5%.
That's about right.
And from FY '11, and the school enrollment then was 220.
Yep.
And we started this year at like 210. In the last 2 years, we went from 2045, what we're, to 2085. Our enrollment went from 172 to about 210. Our enrollment went up about 20%, our budget went up a couple percent. So the school committee has been working doggedly with the rest of the town, you know, to try to do everything we can to keep expenses. And it's come, I mean, as much as we've done some good work on bringing programs back, you know, it continues to come at a cost to what I would consider to be, you know, more ideal for what we're doing with students. We still have art classes where 2 classrooms, so you got over 30 kids getting 1 hour of art a week with a teacher. You know, we have a classroom this year, it's got 27 students. And anybody as a parent experiencing that, as teachers teaching in that classroom, they'll all tell you. I mean, I know the difference, I've experienced the difference between a year with 20 or less kids and what the teacher knows about your kid, and what they do, and what the kid, you know, then gets out of it versus when you get into the upper 20s. That's the kind of stuff we're still dealing with and trying to restore. I know throughout the town that's the case, but it's not like the school just says, hey, everybody else just figure it out.
Oh, no.
And
Well, and
So-
I'm sorry, go ahead, Doug.
yeah, go ahead.
I think, to the end that Dave was just talking about, when you look at the cuts, for us on the other end of those cuts, Scott, like you're saying, it'd be great just to, you know, find a little bunch of, you know, a pile of $40,000.
Right.
But I mean, we can tell you for sure that $40,000 either means several programming, it will mean strings, it will mean band, it will mean, in terms of programming, all of those things that we work to get back, or it will mean a teacher. And on the other end of that,
Sure.
it will also mean some school choice kids will likely move, which is associated with $5,000 per student.
Right.
So we have to think, when we do cut money, we cut even more, because parents have that choice now. And we've seen it, they come, they go, you know, even if it's not convenient to be at a school now, if it's, you know, not on the way to where they go to work, or, you know, they have a lot of these choices now. So we've worked really hard, and we're lucky that we're on, you know, the good end of that. That's a whole different subject in itself, whether that's good, bad, or otherwise, but right now we are, and we benefit from that in this town. So I would say, I mean, if we went ahead and cut a teacher, because we're not sure about that 6th grade class, or whatever that might mean, you know, we may be looking at losing 3 or 4 families from that. And I don't think now it's just, you know, it's not just something people say, they leave. and we know that, because we've certainly experienced that. You know, I mean, at our last, you know, the devastating override, they left in droves. You know, and it's taken us this long to get kids back, and to really show the, you know, the towns and other towns that we've got something fantastic here, and that costs money. You know? Like everything else, even bad education costs a lot of money.
Sure it does.
So, you know, we certainly want to defend what we have in that budget, because I think it's a good budget, but we absolutely hear what you're saying.
Sure.
And,
That's one of the things that we've talked about too, is that now we have some data to back up. You know, around 2010 or so, we didn't have enough data to show, but you could actually correlate, you could graph the two as the budget increases.
Yeah.
So is the choice in.
What happened to choice?
No, I think we did have the data, I just don't think people listened.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
Well, look.
I don't think the relationship
The only
was
thing you have to do is
clear.
look north of us
Right.
and find out what happens where students go if their parents don't like the budgets that are being passed.
Yep.
That was happening more than 5 years ago.
Right.
So I was saying, we knew,
I think,
people wanted empirical data.
I don't
They
think it
have
was
it
as
now.
clear.
I think,
Yes.
I think
Yes.
what we
In
projected.
Sunderland,
Right.
Yes,
we
they do.
could have looked out, David,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but we didn't. Because that data didn't apply to us. But I think it did
and
apply.
that was the song we sang.
Right.
That
I
was
understand.
You know, over and over and over again, people will leave, and that means, even if you have nothing else to do with the school and you don't have kids in the school, that's what it means in the end, it means money.
Absolutely.
Well, and it's just a compounded effect for those families that did leave or that moved to Sunderland and had been able to school a choice into another school locally that had smaller classrooms and were able to take more pupils. So now those families have had more babies, and they automatically just send their kids to Whately because they're already established there.
I went there.
Right, well, I call and I say, but listen, you need to come and see what we're doing, you know what I'm saying? I mean, but,
We tried that. We
but
did,
if we,
come back.
Thank you.
I
A lot
agree.
have, a lot, I mean, like I said, now we're in a good spot, but I think it's important for people to understand, not just in this room, but people in the town, to know that when we make a cut like that, a large cut like that, not just, a copier down the hall, but when we make a cut and it means programming or a teacher, it will likely mean that kids will leave.
Sure.
Okay, speaking of the copier down the hall, you asked this at a meeting, David, and it was a really good question. Are we sharing some kind of,
Well,
contract for
The
the
schools
machines
are.
in the school?
schools are.
The schools
schools
are,
are.
but the school isn't with this building?
Not with this
No.
building.
and that's one of the things that I've been trying to push, because there's gonna be a time where we're gonna have to bite the bullet and not everybody on the same thing, because the whole argument is, well, the contracts are out of sync and
Or
everything.
different times, right?
We're gonna have to figure out a way to
Right.
deal with that
Yeah.
and look at the big
Trash it.
picture and then do it, because there's definitely things that between us, the library, the schools, the more you pool together, it's just common
It's
business
just better
sense.
buying power,
Right, exactly. So that's definitely one of the things we wanna look at. And, I didn't see it in your budget, but this, I just have to mention this, cause this drove me insane. This is the Frontier budget. See all these pages here that are printed, single-sided?
One
Each one
line
of these
item.
represents one line item from the budget.
We
We got rid of
this
that.
year.
We did, we said,
Ours is
I mean,
electronic.
Thank you.
Well, some of them are, but it's just like, that's the kind of stuff that, like, you wanna talk about savings. And I noticed there was a huge increase in toner costs and things like that for the Frontier budget this year.
You
Irony's
know what I think
palpable.
a lot of that is too, David? I mean, we were happy to get it the way that we did,
Legitimate question.
and we didn't, and frankly, it's not convenient to have that.
No.
I'd rather, give me an Excel file.
Couple of sheets.
I probably have 8 of those,
Right, and then
I have.
afterwards, you're like, what do I do now? I gotta go and data
but you know what,
destruct
I
it or
think
whatever.
it's another thing that's just what people are used to.
Right. And this is the kind of stuff we gotta look at. It's little things like this that'll add up, that,
I
you
agree
know,
with that.
that help.
Well, the toner is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
giant expense. Again, it's like the
That-
health
that's not
insurance
cheap,
and the
yeah.
liability and all that. It's just, it's gone.
Go ahead, Doug.
the other, comment on this and dealing with it is that's challenging in the, and I'm sure other departments run into the same way. I can imagine the highway department with, one winter to the next, the variability.
Yeah.
Variability in our expenses can be huge.
Oh, yes.
And so, I mean, five students can put you in a position where you have to have another classroom. That's a teacher, that's roughly 3% increase right there in our budget. So when you're, before anything else, a special ed,
Well, that's
Need.
that's the real unknown that you never can tell.
those can be huge numbers. That can be something that's like 5% increase for one student.
And that's actually, in my opinion, that's the hard part to be the administration does. Because the administration has to look out 5 years or whatever, when they're looking at school choice, and you guys have said it in the past, and I've applauded you before when you said it, because you have had parents come in wanting a second class, and you guys have held your ground, and people come in and ask for more school choice, and you guys have actually done it. It's a fine line that you walk when you talk, because school choice, you get $5,000. Well, you have to do a lot of 5,000s to equal a teacher's salary, and I think you guys do a good job with that. But you're right, and you want to be in a position that you could have. I don't think you want to load all classes, and I don't think you have, but you don't want to load your classes to the maximum and get that extra school choice, because you do walk that fine line. Your class sizes aren't 14.
We'd like our kids in this town to go to our school, though.
That's, well,
That's
and
what
that's,
I'd really like,
that's right.
you know.
And I think it's a very fine line, and that's why I have trouble with school choice sometimes, and because, in my opinion, the $5,000,
We've tried to use it where we have a situation where we've got to that big classroom situation, or we know we have a big incoming kindergarten looking, well then, and we're gonna have 2 classrooms, well, then they don't need to be 2 classrooms of 13 kids,
Right, you can fill them a little bit.
or,
Right.
whatever. Then that revenue is a bonus, and you still have great class sizes, and we've been able to do that in a number of the grades
That has
of late.
worked
Coming back as we brought back programs, especially where we've been attractive as opposed to seeing them go out. So,
What is your average class size?
It's between, I was gonna say, it can go anywhere between 18 and 23, yeah, yeah, yeah.
But to tell you the truth, we're not, not to comment, but toner cost isn't what we're looking. I'll pay the toner cost.
Yeah.
I will not pay some toner costs, it's expensive.
But that's not where our
I
problem
know
are.
you're at bigger.
No,
It's not
for
40,000.
instance-
You're looking for bigger,
and I'm
bigger
just
fish
kidding.
now, yeah.
But for instance, you know, at one of the first meetings I went, I think I was at the school committee when we talked about that 82,000 for the retirement. And I think Patty was taken aback when I said, what are your plans if it fails? So the Board of Selectmen can recommend, school committee can recommend, finance committee can recommend, but the town meeting floor may vote no on that article. That's a cost that you have, and that's a cost that has to be paid. So where does that 82,000, at that point, where does it come from?
Teachers' programs, I mean,
Sure.
or we can turn the heat off, or we can.
I
The
would,
one-
I
the
would,
one
I would
question-
look at, I would actually look at building operating savings, to be honest with you,
Well,
with the energy
And
projects,
again,
that's
and again,
where I
Mar-
try to look.
Margaret,
I
and
know.
again, this is what I'm trying
You're
to
not
say,
gonna get
this is what I tried to
80,000.
say last week. I put that question out there. For one, I don't have to answer that, you guys have to answer that.
Well, the town will answer that, and then we'll
Right.
deal with it, you know?
I think, and my issue with that is to have it in our budget, as we were talking about before, is number one, it's not a true reflection of our budget. And we've all talked to that quite a bit.
Oh.
Which is kind of where it got to,
Because-
why it got to where it
Which
is
is why
now.
it got, but my issue
Right.
is if we have, so if we pick that up and we have to pay for that, that also means cutting, you know, a teacher or programs. So now our kids have to be, we have to, paying of this retirement cost for teachers who have been in our system forever, now it sort of falls on the backs of our kids to go ahead and pay for that benefit. And that
Well-
just does not set right with me.
And this
That
comes,
said, in the current year, that makes some sense, but that doesn't abdicate the responsibility for planning for future years. It
Right.
can
I
be argued,
absolutely
it can be
understand.
argued for budgeting purposes, for 20 years, it was never
Right,
budgeted.
it's never gonna
Right.
end.
what-
Right,
You always have employees, you should have it put aside.
right.
and here's
End of
where,
discussion,
The
right?
town,
That's an OPEB function.
That's, yeah.
It should be part of your payroll function.
that's where I get back to the
So the
toner
past
stuff.
20
It's not about
Have
the
it come at the
toner.
end as a parachute or a balloon or whatever terminology is like, well, wait a minute, you have a contract, that's a binding contract.
It's
But
like,
Percentage.
I think I said this a couple
Yeah.
meetings ago. I think this goes back to
Oh, yeah,
negotiations.
totally, oh, yeah,
well,
I agree with that too.
See, this is what, it's not about the toner cost, it's about thinking differently.
Right.
Right.
That's what it
Because
is.
you're right, Scott. How do we, okay, so this year we do have 3. No, we don't foresee 3 next year.
Right, it's
But
not
you know
gonna be
what?
a
Maybe
year.
the next year,
Well, you already got one,
maybe the next year,
Right,
Right.
so
you know?
so where does
just
that money
take an
come,
average, 1.5.
Right.
where does that money come
Right.
from?
It's a great point.
Yeah,
That's just the cost of employees,
right.
organized or open, doesn't really matter.
So, but again, if we were to if we were to try to put that into our budget and figure out how we work the accounts and stuff like that, either we're adding, pick a number,
Excess.
$20,000 to our budget this year to start putting aside for
Oh,
future
for future,
retirements.
yeah.
Like
Or
whatever
we're
the number
cutting
is.
Right,
$20,000 in the one, I mean, so the one question, Mark, I think, in terms of the buildings stuff has been, it's such a, again, this is like the big variability, and what do you, and budget for, but in the fuel, the oil costs.
electricity in
whether-
particular, I think.
Well, electricity, we kind of can probably can predict more with the safety, and there's like. I think
Oil's
our-
unpredictable.
it's down like 15K, I think, the,
Right.
oil, right? Now, if there's only one fill-up on the oil, it's a lot less than that.
Sure.
It's another, I don't know, I forget what it is, a fill-up, but close to 20, in the ballpark of maybe.
That's-
No, but it's been, I think it's, I don't know how often it's been, and we don't have a lot of years since we've done some of the, I don't know if any of the efficiencies affect
do it
the
for
building.
One of them,
the
the performance
heat.
contract
Yeah,
goes
heat.
back to
Yeah, it should, right. 'cause
almost 3 years. The lighting retrofits are this past
Right.
year, yeah.
And so for the heating, like how often are we needing that extra fill up versus not? I mean, how often are we not needing that many fill ups? Are we likely or not to.
That's something that has to be analyzed by the school to see if it's savings in oil, or if it's savings in electricity, or if it's savings anywhere.
The
So
tough
that
thing
would be
about the-
something that the school would look at, I guess.
The tough thing about the fuel is you got two factors going on. You have the temperature of the winter essentially, and then you have, because oil is now like basically gambled on the commodity markets,
Yeah.
the slightest, little world event can send the price skyrocketing.
Yeah, I think there, and other buildings have seen the same thing with, I think fairly significant savings in electricity. Library's another perfect example. I mean, they've done great with the lighting with lighting retrofits, with, other measures that they've done with, programmable thermostats and all that stuff. So, I mean, those are some areas that they wanna take a look at.
All worth looking at.
I'm sure even things like, class size will factor into how warm it is in the classroom. We can pack more kids in, save on energy.
Yeah, closer together, kids.
And really warm.
Lots of exhaling, right?
I don't know if that's necessarily creative, but,
yeah.
it's a suggestion. Like it. Perfect.
All right,
So-
so that's what you're asking us to do.
Yeah, the big summary,
As we go forward.
the big summary is pretty simple, of $227,000 of increases in the annual budget expense increase this year. 160 is, 160 plus is, I'm getting to the right page now, 143 plus is the, school's total, of which 61 is the elementary school. We're looking for some help. That's big picture. That's before debt, before wastewater treatment, that's just the cost of operating the town.
If there's any chance, now the teacher retirements would be a current year issue, and if there's anything at all, this $83,000 is more than our available free cash
Right.
can bear in combination with, snow and ice deficit and everything else. So if there's anything at all that could be found in the current year's budget to help offset that cost, that would be immensely.
And so that would be taken off the warrant.
That would be taken off. It would actually, yes, it would actually be taken off, because that could be funded right directly from the school budget.
Right.
Right.
And we're gonna ask the same thing of Frontier as well.
Sure.
Don't feel singled out.
How much are you gonna ask them for?
We're gonna ask them for any kind of help, but they're currently at about $152,000 to us. So again, you look at
But it sometimes, it's hard to understand the components of a budget. And Frontier's been in the past, has used around $140,000 of their excess and deficiency
their
to
free
pay,
cash.
to help pay the budget, offset the budget. This year, they have very little, if anything, left in the E&D account, and they aren't offering any money from E&D to help pay for the budget. So right there, that's like $150,000 or $140,000 increase in the assessment to start with. And then you look at the budget, and then there's, they do have reductions, they had a reduction of English teacher, of a special education teacher, but then they look at some of their costs, like building and grounds. They said they have been underfunding, if not funding at all, this building and grounds maintenance. Was a $58,000 increase. So you add that 58 to the 140, and they got 70,000. They have $70,000 increase in teacher retirements. They got $70,000 of teacher retirements that they're paying for also.
Right, and Greenfield High opening up brand-new sparkling building, in September. I mean, the school is dealing with that,
Said it 10 years ago.
Right.
Yeah,
As soon as that was approved, like, oh,
right. No, I mean, it's a big one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bob?
Playing the devil's advocate a little bit, how are we gonna deal with the fact that there's gonna be an additional $119,000 going to the elementary school that's coming out of CPA funds? And in reality, half of that is still tax money. So,
Well, they have to
How
vote
does-
on that, don't they?
well,
Yep.
that's to be
Yeah.
voted, yeah.
Right, so,
I mean, if it passes,
Well, it's capital
Well,
first and foremost.
I would,
It's
I
not
would,
part of their operating. budget.
Yeah, it's not part of the regular.
and I would say that the location that the work is being done is at the elementary school, but it's not, if it was just for the elementary school, I don't think the CPA committee or CPC, what do we call ourselves, the CPC? I don't think the CPC would, because the goal of CPC, one of the goals is that it benefits the
Right.
town.
And that actually benefits the surrounding towns too, really, with the
No,
athletics.
I don't,
It is our
it's just,
center.
yeah,
It is
but,
our-
so that's a, it's just that the location happens to be at the elementary school, but, you know,
No, but that's a very good question. I mean, people are gonna certainly.
People are gonna ask that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because they're gonna say, you're right, that's what their son was gonna say, well, you also have $119,000 going to the school. And it's not the case,
I mean-
it's completely different,
Right.
completely separate.
Of all the things, in some ways, like, it's not only is it that it's something that is used by, not folks,
Health
not
and
just,
safety, health and safety.
in the school, but I mean, it's talking about something that 200 of our little residents per day
Sure.
are gonna actively benefit from.
Be
I mean,
healthy
it's
and
hard to
safe.
find a project that's gonna, that many people are gonna get to enjoy the benefit of it every day.
To
And
Bob,
the
I think,
safety is an issue.
I think to Bob's
It is,
point though,
yeah. There's some out of
Sure.
code item things.
to Bob's point though, it all falls under the moniker of the school. And to some people of a certain vintage, Bob, it's still that new school, isn't it? And I mean that with not being snarky, it's just that new school.
and again, I look at it as a location, not necessarily,
Those old problems.
you know, and I could, and I have had my stated concerns at the CPC meetings, but it was never that it was at the school, it's just the definition that we're supposed to be working off from as a CPC committee.
Right.
And that's, are you maximizing that CPC money for the most amount of people? In fact, what we found out is that the state, there was a question about CPC money going to Frontier to repair the tennis courts. In fact, the state has said that's one of their goals in CPC, is that you look outside of your community also. So they are wholeheartedly in favor of doing something like that. So it's actually very interesting. And if you go one step further, one of the projects, Deerfield Recreation is using $2,500. Deerfield is putting $2,500 into the program, into one of the projects. So I mean, there's a lot of concepts there's a lot of stuff going on in that question that you asked.
There's gonna be a lot of discussion on this in the coming year or two on, the subject of housing, because housing set-asides have to be part of CPA funding. There's gonna be discussion on regional housing opportunities for seniors and low-income individuals.
Really haven't been doing it yet.
Good point.
And that's what I've been saying.
Yeah.
We do a lot, we concentrate a lot on recreation, but we haven't concentrated a lot on other aspects.
That'll be adding insult to injury if we have to fund Sugar Bush Meadows.
You've been funding it for 6 years.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess, I'll go one, we have a major corporate, taxpayer that the assessors just notified us that they've had a reclassification by the DOR, and they're, what, $50,000 less now they're gonna be paying the town in
Yes,
assessments.
little over 50,000 less.
So there's
A year.
more than the
Okay,
40,000
because now
right
they're a
there that-
manufacturer. So you have to ask yourself, who's the manufacturer in town of Sunderland? I didn't know we had one, but,
Let's
And
get
that's
one.
factored
That's
in,
it.
that's factored into these
yes,
numbers, right?
that's,
It is, it had to be reduced, yeah. The new growth had to be
Yeah,
reduced, yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So the goal of the conversation is always to explore and to explain, but also in this case, to ask for your help and encourage your involvement. Okay?
So just to back for 1 minute.
Yep.
In the future, when we feel like we need to be here, like, and it's really essential, do you invite us, or should we just know that? How do we know that?
well, I think that's what we said last
I mean,
week.
of course, we wanna be active and
That's what
showing
we
up.
did say.
Do you
We
know what I'm
didn't wanna
saying?
talk
Like,
about
we
the
just can't
budget
do
because
that
you
every
weren't
week.
here.
Right, right.
And
I'm
last
happy
week
to
we-
invite you.
and
You're
it's-
always invited, but
Right.
I'll,
I
I'll
guess
I'll
it's-
extend
it's-
an
and
invitation.
there's, yeah, it's gonna kind of be something where it's on the agenda, or it's relatively clear that it's gonna be. Yeah.
Well, and we sort of got sidetracked because we were talking about capital, and then we got sidetracked, and then that's when Tom made the comment of it's not really fair to discuss it without you guys here, because
Okay,
we're
not
only
fair.
one part of the equation.
okay.
And that reminds me, all the discussion we've done hasn't even touched on capital and all the things that we're putting off
Again,
that will come
Right.
back to haunt us and make us pay even more money down the road. And even, we've even seen it in the cuts that we have to make here, that all the things that we're cutting are not all of them, but a lot of them are things that we know will come back to bite us down the road.
Well, and the things we've already cut.
That's what I mean,
You
right?
know,
That's what, yeah,
I mean, yeah,
right. It's just something that you're putting off
right.
and is gonna come back at some point.
so the short answer, Trace, is we'll make sure to reach out if it's a
That's not
pop-up conversation, we'll hold off and do this again, where we say, well, listen, let's
Okay.
make sure they're here, we can actually talk about it with everybody in the room. That's the best possible way.
Yeah,
And that's even capital for the school
won't
too,
come up
because we
Right.
didn't have capital in the SES budget this year,
Mhm.
and the same thing with the Frontier.
Frontier.
That's right.
And we had that whole discussion about capital last year with Frontier.
Right, that was a larger discussion.
Because it's getting to the point where it's starting to age a little less gracefully.
Sure.
Do we reciprocate that? Do we say to you, hey, this is the meeting we think you need to be at?
Oh, yeah.
for
Perfect.
our
I think
meeting?
you can say
Yeah,
that.
reach out.
Okay,
Totally reach out.
okay.
I mean, our
Tom?
meeting it has to be next week, we're meeting next Tuesday.
But you have to understand, it's difficult for us to talk about your budget because we've been instructed in the past by administrations that any budget that you guys have is not official until you vote your budget, and you usually don't vote your budget. You have in the past, it's been very difficult even to talk about a preliminary budget because there's always under the guise that it's not official till the school committee discusses it.
Right.
So we never really get to talk to you really about the budget until after you vote it, which is usually in February. So really in March, it's really when.
It's kind of, right,
I
like
think
hustling
the
It's-
to
time
get
for a lot of
going.
And that's why we said, we've tried, and we've tried to have Margaret meet with the superintendent and business manager on a quarterly basis, and we make this recommendation for a long time, as long as Margaret's been a town administrator, I know
and
we've told her that.
we did meet briefly, and actually at the meeting, I had with the superintendent and business manager, we are starting up quarterly meetings beginning in May. So, yeah, we're gonna restart those, yeah.
Those are
That-
very
that's always
important.
been That's
too.
always been a goal of ours, is to have that communication between the administrators, so they
Time to
know.
let the past go.
I know,
Absolutely.
well, it is, but just so you know, that's what we've been trying to
I
do.
mean, for us too.
Yeah.
And
Different
we need
day.
we need you guys to tell your people, we ask Margaret, but the same way you have to ask, and we've asked many times of Margaret, have you met this month or this quarter? And we get an answer, but it needs to be reciprocated because they're the ones that can make a difference.
Well, and I think those meetings are gonna be really important, because just by nature of the fact, we all have to kind of go off into our little groups and come up with our budget. And then when you guys get together and talk, you can get a sense of where things actually stand, because you have to kind of go off, come up with your budget, but then you have to dial into the reality of, well, where's the bigger picture?
Well, and, yeah.
And then we can look at that, and hopefully it'll help us plan better.
And then thinking of, like, is there money in this year's budget potentially to contribute towards that retirement things that they're gonna know sooner than we know.
And then they
Right.
can inform, their committee, and, yeah.
All right.
Alright,
See you guys in about a week.
thank you guys.
Yeah,
you.
see you next Tuesday.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. We go over the minutes of 31st. Excuse me.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion made and seconded, the minutes of March 31st. All those in favor?
Aye.
0, please. Okay, we'll talk about the annual town meeting warrant.
Did you make that?
Tonight. So tonight, what we have in front of us is the draft warrant. And what I'd like to see if we could get accomplished is take a look at the warrant. These are all moved to include, although there's some opportunity in this week to remove or
We're not talking motion side, are we?
Just warrant.
I gave you the motions just because I had them drafted
We're just going
and
through the motions.
Just for the sake of expediency.
just to give you motions,
Just for practice?
Yeah.
just
for
to get you
practice.
ready for next week.
So I'd like to get through, if I could, because we also have evaluations. Thanks so much, Doug. Evaluations, a couple of other things to worry about tonight. We have in front of us the moderator and town administrator met to talk about some of the numbering and layout. There are a couple of these I'd like to see if we can get recommendations on, starting with Article 3, actually. And that is,
I thought Margaret's looking for, you looking for it to be done at town meeting warrant?
Last year it was. Last year it was on the warrant. If you'd prefer to wait to make the recommendations on the motions, I'm perfectly happy with that.
I thought you had a different way of paying this, didn't you?
Excuse me?
Didn't you have a different way of paying this?
this is.
In the
by-
motions I do, yeah, for Article 3, in the motions we do, yes, there's actually going to be, my recommendation to the board in the motion
The
will
ambulance
be
is
from an appropriation transfer from a current year, the current year expense line, yeah.
So with respect to Article 3, Tom, what I'm hearing is the recommendation on, do you want to have the article read the payment method as well as the
No,
motion?
I guess my question is, we've had a special town meeting this year, right?
October of 13,
Oh, you're talking
Right.
about the.
You're trying to tell me that this bill predates?
predates.
It came in after that October 13th special
This
town meeting?
this bill that this coastal medical billing bill, I believe came in at the beginning of March or in February of this year for an FY13 expense.
Oh, okay. Now, I got a question.
Stays in business that way.
And this is what this, and we've seen this before in unpaid bills of prior fiscal years.
I got a question, and I know.
I know you'd have to, I may not be able to
we're
answer
obligated
it.
for the bill, Margaret, but you're trying to tell me a guy is submitting a bill, not 2 weeks after, not 3 weeks after, not 4 weeks after the close of the fiscal year, but 8 months after the close of the fiscal year?
That's correct. Yep. That's correct.
there a
And
punctuality?
in
I'm glad
prior
I'm not
years,
that guy's
this is a
auditor.
standard, I know the board knows this, but this is, the unpaid bills of prior fiscal years.
Margaret, please don't say another word. This is a purely philosophical thing. Why the heck am I paying a bill that we receive 8 months late? When does a contractor take responsibility for his shoddy work? And how do we prove that was actually done? You know, and that these are true bills. Anyways. I'm just venting,
I
Margaret.
hear you.
got something?
I hear you. And until, yeah, I got it.
That's all I'm saying.
When
If-
this warrant was drafted, I was hoping that there would be zero here.
And I'm just saying, if it came 8 weeks later, 6 weeks later, 7 weeks later, but not 8 months. Sorry. Sorry,
Weeks,
Mr. Chair.
months,
Yeah, it's
right?
fine.
I don't know how you feel about that, but Bergeron Electric probably wouldn't be in business if it was billing like that.
Barely in business now, we bill quick.
Well, so if you bill quick, it's just payment
That's
slow.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Question, do you have to pay the bill?
Absolutely.
we're obligated to pay.
And what's the discussion?
Motion, Mr. Chair.
So I
Second,
have a motion to recommend. All those in favor?
aye.
3-0, please. Next up is going to be for our snow and ice for this year. That's Article 4.
Second.
I'd like to commend George and the highway crew for
Oh, what a
being
tough winter.
very,
Yeah.
I don't know what you say. I mean, those guys doing what they did with the budget that they have, the winter that we had, and this was an expensive winter, not because necessarily about the amount of snow, but it stayed so cold for so long. They were able to put the material down and have the roads in the condition they did, and coming back with this cost, and we've seen costs of over $100,000 in the past.
Coming
Yeah.
back with a total cost of $12,000 on this winter.
Right,
Yeah.
so,
That's pretty remarkable.
We didn't
The
get wrapped
motion
up
will
in that.
reflect the actuals.
right.
Bob?
Along those same lines, is there anything that can be done with that bump down next to the
We're working.
They're working on
Oh,
it with
yeah.
the state highway, yeah. I go over that bump a lot, I mentioned it to them, every day.
Yes, and there are a lot of people that are concerned about that. Western Mass Electric has been contacted, and they're doing an action plan right now.
Action. plan.
Actually, some residents.
They're
say
working
it's
on
a
some
nice-
action plan there.
Some residents say it's a nice
Slows them
speed
down.
bump.
Slows
Speed
them down,
bump.
right?
Mr. Leadfoot.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of
Aye.
recommending?
Aye.
3-0, please. So Article 5 is our bill due this year for $12,415 for veterans benefits.
This will be the deficit in this year's line with the payments through June. Yeah.
Motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded to recommend. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. The next is the last of our bills to pay in this current year. This would constitute what historically would be a special town meeting. So this is design services for the remainder of the conclusion of the project known as the History of Sunderland Volume 3. Remember, we appropriate ahead, and then the books get developed, published, and then sold. The sales from those books come back at some point. So this is basically the closeout of that project, if you will.
Only if people pick up a copy, they're available.
It's good
They
for-
are available, yes, and
Time for a plug.
$25 for softcover and $40 for hardcover, both at Amazon.com.
That's
And a
right.
good read. There's a handsome moderator in there. He had hair.
the funding in the
Is it available on Audible?
It's
or-
not him. It's the guy before you.
The funding in the motion will actually reflect use of the Volume 3 fund in combination with free cash, and then that all receipts go back in to replenish free
Okay.
cash, into the general fund, yeah,
Again, in the motions.
in the motion, yep.
Very good. Discussion? If not, is there a motion to recommend?
Motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. Okay, so now we get to the first of the big nuts. I don't know how we can take action, speak forward, how we can take action on this without having next week's meeting with
Alright,
the school
skip
committee.
7, 8. You're right, Scott. Don't even worry about it yet.
We're looking to have a technology audit here in town. That is, and this is an outcome of peer review. And anybody who's worked here, dealt with emails here, deals with stuff here, knows that the technology audit can only be helpful. Common platforms, common hardware, et cetera.
Security,
And
Security.
security, which we
yes.
spent twice this much on this year,
Yes.
actually.
right. Half of this, the $4,600 is gonna be supplemented by another $5,000 grant for this.
Okay.
Don't click on it. 4 words.
So it's gonna be a $10,000 audit?
$9,600 is gonna be, it's gonna involve policy, inventories, operating system reviews, security. I have the whole scope of services.
And for all the,
Comprehensive audit based on DELS's review,
for all the departments.
all municipal departments.
Which will probably only point out areas where we need to
Spend money.
spend money.
Well-
It is what it is.
It's gotta start, you need to know, I suppose, first.
Well, exactly. You have to, you're right, and you gotta know where you are.
Spending blindly
you-
is not a good idea.
No.
Okay,
Yes, it
discussion?
isn't either.
If not, is there a motion to recommend?
Motion.
Second.
Is there all those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. Okay, Tom, we need, this 9 is our appropriation from the special town meeting in October?
The one that we didn't have a bill for coastal? Yeah.
Yeah, that one. They're still waiting. And this, Bob, as well, is to effectively rescind that vote, money that was appropriated, to allow that money to come back to the town to use in this upcoming budget cycle. The SCEMS is still effectively in its development stage, and so we've incurred no costs. It's in its rollout, not its development stage. That's inappropriate. We haven't incurred any costs yet, so having this money back in Sunderland's coffers can only be helpful, and the full appropriation for 2015 is in our 2015 budget. Did I capture that correctly? I want to make sure I get that right as we move forward.
I would ask that the board hold on the recommendation of this till legal counsel has had a chance to review. This is, this is a draft article to restructure the funding, so I'd like to hear back from
Okay.
council if we could,
Hold off
please.
on that one then. Next is the budget, which of course we'll do at another time. 11 is another retiring firefighter who wants to stay active in the fire service. The legislation has an age-specific requirement for firefighters to no longer be able to participate. And we're asking for special legislation, just like we did last year for Richard Dickinson. This actually is firefighter balloonist.
Motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. Okay. Tom, this is an area of concern, and we should have a pretty wide-ranging discussion about this. Do we want to include on the annual town meeting warrant an article that could involve intermunicipal agreement and purchase of property? Or do we want to hold that if something develops and have it as a special?
Right now, they have an offers, and I would say not. The only thing is that potentially is the owner of the building, the potential owner of the building, we're supposed to talk to, he may have some type of offer, but then it's gonna be with a private individual, not
Okay.
the regional library, so.
Okay.
I don't see any reason keeping it on right now.
Okay,
Okay.
And if we have to come back to town meeting, we'll come back to a town meeting.
okay.
So we had this as a motion to include originally. Do we need to move to take it off the warrant?
Motion.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded to remove this article from the warrant. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. And the next actually is a personnel bylaw recommendation. Personnel committee's been working on this, and the recommendation was to include this. We sent this to council, and council has come back and said, there's nothing pressing right now that would require this to be on the annual town meeting warrant, and it may need a little bit more work, so he recommended to take
And
no
more
action.
comprehensive amendments can be brought at a later time.
Right.
Motion.
Motion.
Second.
This would be a motion to remove from the warrant.
Right.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. Okay. 12 is the value of using the free cash formula, moving free cash into stabilization
I'm not ready to vote on that.
because of the nature of the current budget status. Okay.
Okay, so,
13 is effectively the capital budget, which is very much
I mean,
the
it's
same.
there, but I'm just not voting to make a recommendation.
right.
I'm taking the action on recommendation.
And that number is simply plugged in because it's the 30%,
We
that's it.
understand.
Okay.
Very much along those lines, Tom and David, this article numbered 13 is a tentative capital budget, which we haven't developed yet.
Correct.
So let's pass on that. Excuse me, I gotta get to 14. 14 is to see if there's any reason we should amend the dog laws.
Well, bottom line, it's
Oh,
to make
it-
the dog laws in conformance with,
State law.
State
Statutes.
laws.
Right.
so if we don't do it, then we still have the laws.
You comply
that
with
you
state
still-
law.
Your wife has had to have a dog on the leash for the last 20 years. So that's not gonna change no matter how we vote.
I think it's really important, Tom, you say
So
that.
Sherry,
Right.
put the dog on the leash.
There's been relatively little
With the
action,
pooper scooper.
with the exception of the town clerk and our office aligning the two things with state law. It's not like committees work diligently on this.
Yeah.
It's the fact that we're just trying to align it with state law.
This will be the hot discussion topic of the night.
It might be.
Dogs.
I don't know why it would be. Besides, I mean, there's nothing, the law, it's nothing different.
That was just,
And if we don't vote this down, nothing changed, our bylaws, they're all there.
Right.
This is just making in conformance with state law.
That's exactly
that
right.
was, that was
You
just
can discuss
sarcasm.
all you want, but it's not gonna change our bylaws.
Is there a motion to recommend?
Motion.
Motion, is there a second? Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please.
I was looking for a dog joke, I just couldn't find
You
one
just
in
couldn't
there.
do it.
I couldn't pull one
Not
out.
fast enough.
Okay, now we have in front of us two articles, 15 and 16. The first is a citizen's petition, and then the subsequent article, 16, is the language that the planning board worked on to address the original concern of the citizen's petition.
I thought that town council recommended that our revision goes first, and then the citizen petition would follow.
She said that it could go first, and then the citizen could, just withdraw afterwards.
Right.
It
As far
doesn't,
as
either
far as
way.
order of articles goes, you could have the planning boards first.
They said that, I thought town council said that they'd recommend that they go first, explain why it's there.
And then
and
the motion to withdraw, it becomes simpler.
Okay.
That's fine.
We could,
Okay. So flipping the order is one thing.
Yeah, I would just change the order.
Right. So 15 and 16 flip around. The question about recommendation of Article 15, that is the
Citizens
citizen's petition.
petition, I make a recommendation not to recommend.
So we have a motion to not to recommend. Is there a second? Now remember the history here. The citizen petition was developed, came forward, came to the town. We included-
The petitioner's in favor with the revised.
Exactly.
yes, I met with him last week.
Right.
And he was fine, he
Right.
understood the changes.
And so the mechanics here are, we don't recommend that it opens the floor up to the planning board's addressed version of the citizens' concerns, and then that petition is withdrawn.
It's a mechanical issue.
It's actually
It's-
procedural,
it
very much
is,
procedural.
Right.
So if you make a motion to recommend, the board can
It would be a
vote
motion, it
appropriately.
would be, right, it would be a motion to recommend and then vote appropriately. The motion actually on the table right now is to not recommend. That was your motion.
Mm.
Is there a second?
Because I have to recommend to not.
Is there a second to his motion to not recommend?
You're not recommending.
The citizens
The
petition.
citizens petition.
Right. Second.
Okay, we have a motion, second, and made and seconded. This is a motion to not recommend. So on the warrant, it would show up as recommendation 0X.
Correct.
Okay? All those in favor of not recommending this article, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. 3-0 to not, which means,
It's gonna reflect a
We're
zero.
working in negative.
It's gonna reflect
Exactly.
a 0-3 vote, okay, 0-3.
okay. So now the article that addresses the citizens' concerns through petition and the planning board, this article, what's soon to be fifth.
Basically, Bob, as you know, since you're a former chair of the planning board, when they write a bylaw, there's a lot of things that can go into it. Words, use schedule, et cetera. So basically, the citizens petition was a very basic, general thing. Planning board went back and they looked at his thing and they incorporated what he wants. Basically, he wants to be able to build in rural residential. He wants to be able to build into the setbacks, which we used to have in the bylaws, and they were changed. So it's really going back to the way it used to be in 1998.
We talked about small outbuildings, water pump sheds, those kinds of things.
Extraneous.
To be able to get in the
So the
setbacks.
planning board, members of the planning board went back and rewrote it to conform with our bylaws. And actually, this is the way it should work, is where the citizen makes a petition. The town works with a petition, so we don't cause trouble. We maintain consistency, so. Motion to recommend.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please.
And if we could renumber, please?
Yeah, we're gonna pull these back together, and our next draft will actually have these renumbered, including the exclusions. Code of Sunderland. This is a couple of strike-throughs, and this has to do with language on large-scale ground-mounted solar. This
I'm
is a
sorry, you don't
cleanup.
have the handout in front
That's
of
all
you,
right.
so.
A cleanup of the original planning board.
Well, they went through it once, so now they know what it is.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So is there, motion's made second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
3-0, please. Okay, so now we get into the CPA articles here. This would be an article for $8,450, part of our percentage for the district's tennis court project. The CPC, we have recommendations from them on any of
They're
these
not
yet?
meeting till Wednesday night.
Okay. Does it make sense for us to hold off on this recommendation to hear what comes out of CPC?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, it is
does.
really their process at this point.
I would agree. So that takes us down to
Consent
what?
articles.
Gets us down to consent articles. There's no action required by us at all.
There's one new revolving fund, that really is the only change, and a slight increase in the Board of Health dollar value not to exceed.
Okay.
That's it.
So we'll have this renumbered and back to us, and then next week we'll also go through we'll also vote on the motions. I was gonna say
Does
go
the board
through
wanna
the
do-
motions.
Does the board want to do its recommendation on the consent articles as a slate, or? do you-
Motion.
Second.
Oh, yeah, there it is. It was submitted by us. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 3-0, please. Okay. So motions will be next week. A revised annual town meeting warrant will be next week. As you heard tonight, there's a school committee, elementary school committee meeting next week. Again, they'll be talking about budgets. And I appreciate the dialogue tonight with respect to that. Now, we have in front of us Silver Lane Street Change Name Update, and there's a form of an email. I'm gonna dig through my papers. Oops, sorry. There it is.
I would just advise the board to read legal counsel's recommendations, or opinion on the street name change. This clearly does not require a town meeting vote. It's in the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen in the absence of appointed or official road commissioners.
Okay.
So this is a process the Board of Selectmen would follow.
Okay. We had this discussion with the chief. There was some homework that we left with about overlapping numbers. Do we contact, when I say duplicate numbers on both streets, if this turns into simply Silver Lane or South Silver Lane, an extension of, there was some homework that was associated with it. So this is good guidance for us, but again, it would be a tragedy of sorts to have duplicity in the mailing numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Before we go about changing the name, that due diligence, I think, we have in front of us. But it is nice to know in some ways that it's not a requirement of town meeting. That was one of our first pieces of homework. Okay. Tom?
Also, Scotty.
Okay. So we did the warrant review. Budget and capital, I want to hold off a little bit on the capital piece. I think we need to review that and come forward, and as in light of the current operating budget gap and available revenues, we have our use sheet in front of us, available as our packet, and then the requests, so before our next meeting, we can develop the capital budget. 2 weeks ago, our computer use policy bit came forward about social media, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's important to have available at our next meeting as well. We have not had a chance to read it. I think it'd be important to do. We are having departments participate in social media and requesting things like Facebook pages.
We already have this in.
That's correct. That first one, the internet, the electronic communications policy,
Right.
those are revisions to our existing policy.
Right, they're not huge revisions.
They're not significant
No,
revisions,
no, there are a lot of revisions, but really they reflect what was in the town's
Right.
network and electronic resource usage policy.
Right.
The revisions actually come from legal counsel's template,
Right.
so
For
yes.
social media, guidelines, use, et cetera.
So, and I say this because of the new, I'd like to vote on this soon, because I'd like to forward a copy of this to town of Deerfield, because they do not have, as I understand from the selectmen, they do not have this, and the ambulance, South County Ambulance wants to put a Facebook page together. I think there should be
Okay.
guidelines for that.
Then in that case, Sunderland, it will also now have, if the board approves this, the social media policy and use guidelines will be separate,
Back 4 pages.
but supplement the internet, the network use policy, so.
I'd be actually fine taking action on this tonight, having read it. Most of it, I'm not involved in social media, but I can certainly understand the risks as well as the requisite discipline the town takes. Not
Right.
discipline in the sense of something being wrong, but how we have to be responsible about it, representing the town. So I'd be happy to entertain a motion to amend our current policy and
adopt the social media.
adopt the social media.
Dave, do you have any questions about, or,
No, I'd second it.
all right,
We have a motion made and seconded. All those in favor?
aye.
3-0, please.
Margaret, when you're done with this,
Yes.
could you please send a copy and CC Mark Gilmore, please?
Yes,
And could you also send him a copy of our procedures guidelines that we use in the town?
yes,
Our policy and procedures?
yes,
He's been asking me for that.
yep.
And it's one of those things too, especially with social media, you wanna revisit it every, couple of
We-
years.
Yeah,
you
things
have to-
change quickly.
They
You
do.
have to, but you have to get something out there.
Oh, right, you start
Right? I
with
mean,
this and then you
the
periodically
longer we-
revisit
The
it.
longer we wait, and you're right, David, you have to stay.
Just because we do it now doesn't mean we're done for years,
Yeah.
It's an ongoing.
It's keep, I mean, when we first started was Facebook, now you Instagram and Twitter and
Right, and if we had done
And
this years
LinkedIn
ago, it
and
would have been
everything,
MySpace
yes.
before that,
whatever,
so you
whatever
can see
those
what
young,
that is.
Yeah, this
one of those
applies to
young
all
whippersnappers are doing these days.
Hammer and chisel.
Can't keep up with those either, so-
stone.
Okay, I will send copies.
So along the lines of having done
Yeah,
something once and
whippersnappers.
letting it stay that way, what we have next in front of us is a administrative policy around our sewer system and how the fees are developed. One of the things we are as sewer commissioners, of course, is we get a budget from the operator, we get a capital assessment as part of that budget process, but we also have in this building, tax collector, treasurer collector, an accountant who all work on things related to the sewer, but it's not necessarily associated with any of the fee structure. And so it can be argued that many people not on the sewer system, underwrite very, very minimally, but can underwrite some of those fees. So anyway, that said, in conversations over the last week, town administrator, it was important to think beyond just the sewer and the capital and the direct budget, and what are some of the areas that the sewer users actually get as part of this office, insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have in front of us a draft policy about the allocation of the fees that go to the sewers. We know you have to pay to operate, you know, we have to pay to keep it up, but we also identify a couple of the other indirect costs that simply have been absorbed by the regular operating budget. So that's in front of us. Go ahead, Bob.
Not budget related, but how is it determined how septic loads are dumped in our facility versus other facilities? Because this fall I had my tank pumped,
Mm-hmm.
and they said that I'd have to wait another,
Mhm.
6, 8 weeks before I could dump into Sunderland.
Mhm.
So they had to take it to Hadley,
Mm-hmm.
and it cost me twice as much.
Well, they did it twice as much just because it was yours.
I can get you the details on that, but I know
It
that
has
the
to do
project
with-
manager has been here talking with the board about that, with the limits on the amount that they can take in any given period. So it had to have exceeded whatever that threshold was, with the timing of yours, so.
So you've got regular influent into the system, and then you accept then the operators will accept certain loads. And loads have, also got a threshold. Remember that everything is predicated on the total volume leaving the system. It's a discharge permit is what we're working on. So it may simply be
General
math, that was a month where there was too much, and it is a 7-day rolling average up into a 30-day aggregate, and that's what your NIPD's permit is about. So you simply may have hit the wrong month.
Or you just got a really big tank,
Right, exactly. So that's likely the answer to the question. But that said, what we have in front of us tonight, I think, is something for us to bear in mind as we move forward. There's another administrative function that we perform that's been very static for a number of years, and that has been invoicing and fund maintenance for the water district as well. And so again, in talking with administrator today, as well as in working in a municipality that actually does this, instead of it being a static invoice, the suggestion is to take a percentage, a very small percentage, 1%, of the total value billed, invoiced, versus number of invoices, flat rate of $200, whatever it is. Because then the format becomes dynamic. It's not static with time. If the invoices go up, then you expect the workload to go up. If the invoices go down, you expect the workload to go down. If bidding and bonding goes on, same situation.
more realistic.
So I put this out in front of the board for discussion and then to act on next week. Okay,
Can I ask that you have a water commissioner here so we can discuss it with him?
absolutely. Yep. And again, it's not simply a matter of raising their fees, it's a matter of being dynamic with the amount of work that's being requested. Okay. Next up for us, annual performance evaluations. We have the three department heads, and town administrator. Historically, the chair has done the town administrator's performance review. I would appreciate the opportunity to continue with that tradition this year and ask about the fire chief as well as the police chief. And you have attachments for each of those in our packet tonight.
Well, I've been working a lot with the fire chief this year.
That's a really good point, actually. It's all right with Tom, does the performance evaluation of the fire chief? Okay, Tom, you'll be our delegate with that, and David, that leaves you, police chief?
Sure.
Okay, very good.
The lead person for each of the positions will collect the reviews from each of the board members for those positions, and then they'll be compiled. We do have a board evaluation form that I can put together once you've compiled your 3 sets of evaluation.
Okay. All right, any? Yep, thank you, Tom. It will be warrant and motions next week. Do we have any selectmen's updates to bring forward? If not, is there administrator updates? Do you wanna share, Margaret?
Well, one of the big things is this past Friday morning, I had a conference call with Tom Zimnowski of the Telecommunications Committee, who's kind of handling our website transition, and a representative from VTH, and we came up with a timeline for implementation. I have to email all boards, committees, and departments tomorrow to let them know to create or to inform them that they should be completing an online survey to identify the contact people, members of their committees, things like that, and department information. There's also VTH, a representative from VTH is gonna come out for one day, either next Tuesday or Wednesday, to meet with all departments for about 30 minutes each to make sure that they have the information correct. Then let's see, at the beginning of June, there's going to be a training date for departments. And then the idea is to go live by mid-June. So, website's on its way, and I also had an update today from the assessor's office on GIS. Lee Whitcomb is actually still doing some work on GIS, and hopefully, the GIS kickoff will be in line with the website kickoff.
Okay. All right, next up for us, of course, we're meeting next week. We have a busy week next week. We're meeting with the folks from Leverett. We're gonna do our warrant and our motions. It's gonna be a busy week. The 21st, of course, the town office will be closed for Bunker Hill Day.
Right.
The board's meeting's
No.
gonna start next week at 6:30.
And we are starting early next week. It's a good point. Thank you, Margaret. Our annual town meeting is the 25th at 6:30 at the elementary school. That's Friday. And then, of course, town elections are May 3rd, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., also at the elementary school. Okay, we're going to go to executive session. And we're going to go to executive session. Again, this is an update for the current police contract negotiations and to finalize our minutes for the current year. And this is under, sorry, wrong side. This is under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, Paragraph 3, as well as 7. And we will be returning to open session only to adjourn. So is there a motion, and if so, let's follow with a roll call vote.
Can you please read, I'm sorry, could you please read the 2 paragraphs?
I'm sorry, yeah. It's going to be to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation. If an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares, and I do. And then Article 7 is to comply with or act under authority of any general or special law or federal grant in aid requirements, and that's specifically, we're talking about our minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Fidenkevitz?
Aye.
Mr. Bergeron?
Aye.
Mr. Pierce?
Aye.
Again, we'll be returning to open session to adjourn. Thanks, FCAT.